بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين وهو خير ناصر ومعين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين ولعنة الدائم على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Assalamu alaikum to all our viewers to this program, Spiritual Perspectives, a program that is dedicated to find out the challenges that Islamic civilization or Islam have faced in the past and its contribution through which our youth understand what Islam is and how Islam have faced these challenges. And even today there's a lesson for Muslims, for our youth to really learn and to really see these challenges and answer it. These challenges on the basis of the traditional teachings, on the basis of Islam, on the basis of the Quran and Sunnah. For those who have missed our previous programs, they could log on to Hidayat on YouTube or Hidayat website as well and follow us and reach to the discussions where we have reached, because it's quite important that to have some understanding where we are really coming from. To our youth, we are trying to point out to them or provide them with a guide that, see, in the course of time, Islam have faced these challenges, and Islam has contributed this in the field of astronomy, in the field of geography, in the field of mathematics, in the field of all of the different phenomena that are there. And now today we will be looking at the history of Islamic philosophy. Like we said, many of the Western Orientalists, they tend to criticize Islam as they played a role in translating, in transferring Greek or Alexandro-Grego knowledge to the West. It is not just the translation or transferring that knowledge. There's a great deal of contribution. There's a great initiation of many fundamental sciences that today the modern era is indebted to. If one looks at the transformation or translation to the West, and the West have taken it on a different plane, even if that is accepted, West would have been in no way close to where they are today if in the Dark Ages, because the Dark Age, which they call it the Dark Ages, it is really Muslims who were excelling, who were progressing, who were developing, who were contributing to these sciences. If Muslims were not there today, then the West would have still remained in the Dark Ages. There would have been no point of Renaissance occurring. The Renaissance and the initiation of the Renaissance and the beginning of coming out of the Dark Age for the West is due to the fact that the Muslims have saved and have preserved the sciences and the knowledge, which, if they say that it comes from Greeks, will be so the case. But as a matter of fact, as we said, that Muslims, they have approached the sciences from a completely different methodology. They approached the nature, the planets, the maths, the numbers, the reality, the existence, while keeping in mind the mabda' wa ma'ad, while keeping in mind the beginning or the source and the end of that created thing. Now, let's kind of give few definitions which we have done in our last program. But I would quickly define what philosophy is according to Greek philosophers. Number one, they say philosophy is the knowledge of all existing things qua existence, knowledge of the divine human matter, or philosophy is becoming godlike to the extent of human ability. These are the definition given by the Greek philosophers. Then we looked at the definition given by Al-Kindi, where he talks about philosophy is the knowledge of the reality of things within people's possibility, within that human possibility, because the philosophers' end in theoretical knowledge is to gain the truth in the practical knowledge, to behave in accordance to that truth. Then Al-Farabi, the second teacher, then Ibn Sina, who tend to use the word al-hikmah. However, this word of hikmah was coined by Sohrawardi, one of the Neoplatonic or Platonic philosopher, if you want to call him. He was the first one to really coin this term, and Quran really uses this word al-hikmah. Like we said, the Muslim philosophers, the basis of the Muslim philosophers, the foundation of the Muslim philosophy is upon the Quran and the Sunnah. Now, we had promised last week to really point out to understanding Islamic philosophy and the definition of philosophy within the mystical traditions. That's where we stopped. Ikhwan Safa, which is the 10th current era, 10th century, they have defined philosophy as, and they were Ismailis as well, they've defined philosophy as, this is a mystical tradition. They define that the beginning of philosophy is the love of the sciences. So the beginning is the love. The middle, its middle, knowledge of the realities of the existence to the measure of human ability. So the middle is the knowledge. So they are defining philosophy as Ikhwan al-Safa. They are known as the Baradaran of purity, the brethren of purity. And its end, words and deeds in accordance with that knowledge. So a person begins with love, increases the knowledge, and deeds and speech is in accordance with that knowledge. This is falsafa. This is philosophy defined by Ikhwan. The Ismaili Pythagorean thought have emphasized a greater deal on the relationship between theoretical aspect of philosophy and the practical dimension. Today, we tend less to find this methodology. A person who is a philosopher, he is not engaged in participation of what he philosophizes as such. It could be just a pure theory of philosophy for him, but rather not practical. But Muslims, they are heavily engrove, or they are heavily emphasized, or they heavily emphasize upon the practicing philosophy. That is why it became more clear evident, it was more evident in the Sohrawardi onwards, that a philosopher, and even today if you look at Muslim philosophers, when it comes to practice, they are very muttaqi. Like for example, today we have Ayatollah Jawad Amali, who is known as the philosopher of the time, who is known as the transcendental philosopher of the time. But at the same time, you see him to be very pious, very muttaqi. Or for example, Allama Tabatabai, who was a great philosopher, but at the same time, he was a very pious person. Imam Khomeini, for example, and many contemporary philosophers. So Mullah Hadi Sabzawari, if we go the early 19th century. Then is Sohrawardi, who is the founder of the new intellectual perspective in Islam, which was known as Hikmat al-Ishraq, which is known as the School of Illumination, or he was considered as the Illuminist, Ishraq, where many of the sciences is by illumination. It's been mentioned in his regard that the way he would teach his students is by telepathy. The students will come and sit in the class, and he will transfer the knowledge by telepathy, without speech, without saying anything. So because he was an expert in illumination, his theory is a theory of illumination. the sciences or the philosophy of illumination, which is known as Hikmat-e-Ishraq. Well, he was killed very young, in Syria by the king of that time in early 30s. At that age, he has reached that sort of, extreme, intellectual, kamal, perfection. So the highest level of hikmat requires, according to him, perfection of the theoretical faculty and the purification of the soul. According to him, philosophy must be realized within one's whole being. Is the realization, and that should be realized within one whole being, and not only a mentally sort of thing or a phenomena, but one must come out of one's body and ascend to the world of lights. He talks about these divine lights. He sees the existence as one reality. In his famous, they were known as the Fahlaviyun, the early Fahlaviyun. For example, the way they tend to describe existence or the existence of God in relation to these divine lights is this: they called it as one existence, just like nur, just like light. How there are grades of lights, how there are different intensity in lights, they also say that it is one light. The light that is near that fluorescent, the light that falls on your table, both are light, but in terms of the capacity, in terms of its grades, they are different. So the same way, the whole creation is described as nothing but that light itself, but there are different forms, types, shapes, and capacity and intensity of this divine light. So for him, he says that it is not just mentally, but it is something that is by whole being. One must come to the realization of it, and one must come out of one's body and ascend towards this world of lights. Then the synthesizer, of the transcendental philosophy, which was Sorowardi, and the Platonic and the Aristotelian philosophy, which were known as the Masha or the peripatetic philosophy, is the synthesizer is known as Sadruddin Shirazi, known as Mulla Sadra, who asserted in regards to the definition of philosophy that falsafa is perfecting the soul to the extent of human ability through the knowledge of essential reality of things, essentially how they are, essential reality of things as they are in themselves, not the form or shape or color or taste, but as they are in terms of his wujud, in terms of his existence, how they are. And through judgment concerning their existence, establish upon demonstration and not derive from opinion or any imitation. So looking at the existence, the way it is, the way the existence is, that's what philosophy means. In another of his masterpiece, which he wrote during the end of his life, which is known as Shawahid al-Rububiyyah, where in which he writes, Shawahid is the witnessing of the lordship, or the Rububiyyah is the Lord, right? So therefore the witnessing, where it talks about seeing these realities, in which he mentions that through falsafa, through hikmah, man becomes an intelligible world resembling the objective world and similar to the order of universal existence. So Mullah Sadra accepts hikmat as understood by Sorowardi, as hikmah, as falsafa, right? And then expands it, and includes the different dimensions of philosophy and realization implied by Ishraq, and also many of, as we say, he's the synthesizer, and also many of the mystical, if you want to call Sufi understanding, of the term of falsafa, of hikmah. He sees that hikmah as the ultimate divine source of knowledge. It is really through hikmah. And hukama for him, those who are considered as the hukama, the philosophers or the true philosophers for him, are really the most perfect human being, such as the Prophet, such as the Imams. So he regards the Imams and the Prophets as the perfect human beings or the philosophers. So right here we see the very fine line of distinction between Greek philosophers or other philosophers compared to Muslim philosophers. For Muslim philosophers, the guidance, the leadership is perfect human being who are considered by him as the Prophet, as the Imams. This conception of philosophy of discovering the truth concerning the nature of things and mental knowledge with the purification and perfection of one's being has lasted to this day. Very similar approach. That is the perfection of human soul. It is really coming out of the human body to realize the divine light, to see the divine light. And in the 20th century as well, we have great masters in this field. Let me take few names. Mirza Ahmad Ashtiani, who is the author of many books in philosophy. Then you have Sayyid Muhammad Kazim Assar, the author of Wahdatul Wujud. Allama Sayyid Muhammad Hussain Tabatabai, the Sahib Mizan, many of the philosophical treatises, many of the contemporary works that we have. Then we have Sayyid Ruhullah al-Musawi Khomeini once again. They all wrote extensively on philosophy. Amazing piece of works that we have today. It's been written by them. Now, as we said earlier, where is the place of Quran? And where is the place of Hadith in the philosophy? See, one of the Western writers, Oliver Leaman, he mentions in his book, in the history of Islamic philosophy, that it is not the case that Islamic philosophers took Greek concepts and then used them in their attempt to make sense to the Islamic world. Concepts are not like clothes, which one can just pick up and put on, but they are like clothes to the extent that if they have to go on a different frame, then they will only fit if they are adapted to the new body. It is very difficult to adapt a concept which was appropriate within a particular context to a very different state of affair. So Oliver Leaman, he's saying that it is not possible that a concept could be adapted and kind of fit into a new reality, right? When you're approaching when a philosopher approaches an existence, he is approaching this existence how it is, not on the basis of the concepts that he has in mind, not on the basis of the imitation of Greek philosophy, as we said earlier, in regards to the definition of philosophy by Mullah Sadra. So he's not approaching this because the Greek philosophers have called this such a thing, like a cup, So, that is imitation. That approach is trying to take that concept and try to fit in, you see. But a philosopher really approaches a thing, an existence around him or him as it is, the way it is, right? So it is not, as we said earlier, it is an extension or expansion or transformation of that Greek philosophy, but it is independent. So Islamic philosophy, like everything else in Islam, the fiqh, the tafsir, jurisprudence, history, is deeply rooted in the Quran and Hadith. A philosopher An Islamic philosopher, if something that goes against the Islamic belief, or if you want to call the Quranic, the Rivai ideology, belief, they will reject that. They will not accept it. Well, they might have shed some light on those phenomena, but not that they accept it. They might have approached that subject, they might have talked about it, they might have expressed things, but it is not their belief. It is not something that they are promoting. So for them, Quran and Hadith, their philosophy is based, Islamic philosophy is deeply based upon the Quran and Hadith. One can certainly assert that Islamic philosophy is not Islamic due to the fact that it's cultivated, nurtured by Muslims in the Islamic world. Rather, it is considered as Islamic due to the virtue that its principles are purely based upon the Quran and Hadith. So, philosophers who have approached philosophy because they were Muslims, that is why it is known as Islamic philosophy. I'm sorry, that is not the case. The very philosophy is based upon the principles of Quran and Sunnah. Let's take a break here and we'll continue right after this short break in regards to the history of Islamic philosophy.